Welcome to the latest episode of CarePoints. I'm your host, Kenny Schiff, Chief Marketing Officer for Lone Star Communications, the Alero Solutions Group, and our latest family member, Promobix. Today's episode is part of my continuing series of conversations with my collaborators at Lone Star, customers, partners, and notable folks in the tech industry. Thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to another great conversation with my guest. Welcome back to CarePoints. I'm here today with a very, very special friend, George Weldon Jr. And George and I go back over 10 years. We did a lot of work together when George was part of Northwell Health, specifically at Northern Westchester Hospital. Let's have George talk a little bit about himself and introduce himself to the audience.
All right. Hey, Ken, thank you for the introduction. So, George Weldon Jr. here. I've been in healthcare for just shy of 20 years and in leadership for about 14 and a half in many different capacities. So started in some basic analytics, found myself in some innovative technologies, which is where Kenny and I joined forces, as I'd like to say, and just continued on the pathway of healthcare leadership at a very high level, a great institute, and moved on to a larger role more recently as a VP over operations at large. But I think the most fun I've ever had is working with Ken on innovation and how it complements patient-centered care as well as workflows. So hence me being here today, and I appreciate you having me.
Cool. And one of the things that we'll kind of explore is George is a polymath. He has lots of different interests, and in as much as he's had a heavy-duty dose of operations over the last few years, one of the things you'll learn about George, and we'll weave some of this in, is that he's worked on all sides of the equation, and he started out life as a mental health professional. So even though he is a technologist and an operations guy, one of George's superpowers that he brings to the table is his comfort and facility working with people. I think those of us in the technology business don't always give the people side of things probably enough attention, and it limits what we can do with the technology. So George and I already alluded to work that we've done together. So I'll say this, he and I were able to push some pretty lofty initiatives forward when Northern Westchester is a community hospital, and yes, it's part of Northwell Health, one of the largest health systems in the country. There's a lot going on there at every imaginable level. So to be able to take some cool conceptual ideas and find a way to actually bring them to life is no little feat. So what I say about George when people ask me about him is that he was able to combine vision, leadership, and political finesse. And politics play a large part of what goes on in hospitals, and socialize the work that we were doing, and he was able to get it funded and manage its execution. So from a customer's perspective, given the lofty things we were able to do together, what can others learn from what we were able to do together successfully?
That's a great question. I think it's like with anything else, it starts with connection, right? And it starts with human connection and really being on the same page, coming from a different angle and respecting one another's opinion and valuing the input and subject matter expertise. But I think at the end of the day, it really is about what vendor is going to make me believe that this product can save me time, create efficiency, improve workflows, increase safety and quality. And it all starts with a relationship. So what I mean by that is I've seen many, many vendors throughout my career, many of which are just, good salesmen. And that's important as well in that industry. But ultimately, it can't be just transactional. It needs to be built off of a foundation of trust and understanding once again. And that to me is key. So one thing Ken mentioned is I started my career as a therapist. So I'm very keen to how a person behaves and kind of how they communicate. And if it feels like they're coming from the heart and it seems genuine, I think those are the, sales and vendor folks that just do better and have long lasting relationships as opposed to the single transaction here and there.
So you've dealt with a wide spectrum of vendors, from those who are essentially the equivalent of used car salesmen to those who are, even for complex systems, but those who are selling commodities. So if you were looking at vendors in general in the eye and say, hey, you want to be effective in the healthcare enterprise, what do you need to, what vendor, these are some things that you need to do in order to foster the trust, the relationships that you were alluding to.
I think it's really, really important once you get the foot in the door to be consistent, but then also trying to build upon that connection, right? You get that one foot in the door with a me, let's say, but who else do you need? And any one of these sales opportunities in the healthcare system is going to require stakeholders. And if you don't have many stakeholders kind of really cheering in your direction, it likely will take 5 years to land a, $20,000 deal. And is that really worth all that time? Or, you start to find out from that one person in the door that you build that connection with, who's the chief nursing officer, who is the head of facilities, who is the head of IT, clinical engineering. Ultimately, what are the site's issues? Because no two sites are alike. Yes, every healthcare institution provides care, but every site's goals and issues are unique to their own. And I think that's where developing, again, those relationships and key stakeholders and building from there.
Yeah, in the end, when I look at I see you as a coalitionist, right? So, and coalitionists understand that it doesn't, you may have had the most brilliant idea ever, but if others aren't on the same page with you, there's no point in that idea.
Many cases, it actually has to be dealt as someone else's idea. And that's okay too, right? Because that's what's the ultimate goal. It's not your own claim to fame. It's trying to achieve better care and opportunity for site. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who gets the kudos and credit. Eventually, it all comes out and everybody knows who's behind it.
Well, you talked about authenticity and from the heart. So in the end, and healthcare, while it happens to be a very transactional, financially oriented landscape, it's all about caring for patients. so weaving this together for the common good ends up being an important part of the work that folks like yourself have been doing. Let's shift gears a little bit and we'll just talk about technology lifecycle. So no matter what, even though ultimately it's about people and healing people and taking care of them and so forth, technology has played an important role in healthcare for a really long time, and even that much more over the last 10 or 15 years. And there is the introduction of the idea of the technology, there is the execution of it, there's the maintenance and sustenance of it, there is the growth of it. What are some lessons that you've learned along the way that you would consider to be best practices to make the most of technology and make it be effective and serve the best interest that you've learned over the years?
So technology in acute care behaves a lot like a teenager. It starts with big promises, grows into something unpredictable, and eventually, if well guided, becomes a responsible adult that doesn't crash the system at 3 a.m. And so that's how I've come to love and look at technology in the healthcare setting. It's like this wild, unpredictable teen that can turn into something amazing and great, or it could come flying off the rails and crash and burn. So hospitals don't buy technology, to answer your question. They buy outcomes, right? They look for stability. And to your earlier mentioning, like, you could have the best product under the sun and you could tout it all you want, but if there's really no data, if there's no justification to help drive it, it's just the nicest, newest, shiniest toy on the block. So I think really what needs to be the selling point is what outcome will be derived from said product or said solution. So that's key to me.
So going through some of the things we plan to talk about. So one of them, and we both used the word transactional. So at its worst, you have a transactional relationship, and in the hospital, it's easy to talk about buying Band-Aids or bandages or consumables, and you could probably buy those from anybody and not have to worry about crashing at 3 o'clock in the morning, because if it's a commodity, it's a commodity. So the gold standard is to have a lifelong relationship with the customer. When you were at Northern Westchester, that's a customer that I had worked with for, by the time you left, for 17 years. And we were able to kind of work through multiple different, because inevitably people leave, there are new people that come in, the organization changes. So let's go back to what it takes to become a lifelong partner to the hospital, so that one can have a sustained relationship. Because once you have the confidence level in the partner, then you can begin to explore and do other things that when you're first lighting up a system, you just can't think about.
Yeah, I think, I'll speak to our relationship as a good example. I think it was built on curiosity, right? And this like mad scientist lab mindset of just wanting to do good and wanting to see good outcomes. And we knew there was a basis. So the curiosity is what really sparked next level conversation. And then to like the level of empathy that, I, as the healthcare not provider, direct care, but, employee, professional in healthcare, where my number one job is to support the well-being of our patients and our staff, for that matter. Does this vendor have empathy? Do they actually care to shadow a nurse at 6 a.m. or 6:30 at change of shift on a Monday, after the entire ED is being bailed out? Like, do they really want to get there? Do they want to dig into the weeds? So I think that's the kind of stuff that stands out. Like, who has the willingness to go beyond that transactional meeting, but show up when it's good, show up when there is no sale on the table, show up when things are bad and in a meaningful way, and not look for like a big payday out of it. Like, obviously look to be compensated for work, but really look at it as, I'm your partner in this. It's not just this one-time sale. Long game mentality is what I'm talking about.
So we, over the years, we ran into some pretty nasty situations, some of which were related to things that were under our control. Many were not. So there is at its best, there's a collaboration there. Like when the proverbial what hits the fan, we were in the trenches together. So that and there was it was never a finger pointing situation. We knew collectively we had to roll up our sleeves and marshal whatever resources were needed, and we did the things necessary regardless of who got them done.
It's fully aligned. I mean, half the time, the people who I was tapping and pulling into a crisis-like situation is also built off of the relationships with vendor, right? Because as site lead, you don't necessarily know all the key people to engage with when you're at like really dangerous situation. You want to get a hold of people immediately. You don't want to have to rely on a middle person, with zero disrespect. You want them to know that you're paying attention. You have an issue. How are you going to work with me as my partner in this? So that also was a really good learning and training tool, and also a good indicator of a vendor relationship. It's like your willingness to share resource that not every vendor is willing to do. Like, you get one number and it's the customer service number, and then you're in the queue. Not to say at a certain scale you can't and shouldn't get to that point, but in critical situations, knowing you could have that more white glove service, I think that is the difference maker.
So one of the great things to kind of bring back that you bring to the table is your personal diversity. So clinicians end up being a super important part of what goes on in a hospital. In many respects, they may be underserved or undervoiced in terms of things. So what you bring to the table as somebody with a clinical background is that you're able to kind of have been able to meld together the operational, technical, clinical pieces, which in the end up being the success elements for an effective solution. So let's talk a little bit about that. How have you brought your kind of broader clinical perspective to both the technology and operational equation.
Yeah, you know what, and I don't think it's unique to technology or any kind of circumstance. It's how I was raised in a certain respect. Come from very, very humble beginnings, and really also understand the importance of having every voice heard when it's a stakeholder in a situation. So over time, just through learning tough, and then eventually getting in a professional setting, I didn't want to leave behind anyone that could have an important voice in what would be a big outcome or a big decision, a financial decision. So really my mindset was always, and I equate it to the ripple in the pond effect, right? You throw a pebble in a pond, you'll see the first 5 ripples, like they're obvious to you at the top of the water, but will you see the next 5 and the 5 behind that, and those quiet little ripples that really do make its way to shore? You just don't necessarily see them. Are they at the table of decision making? And not for every decision, but obviously you want to have, in some cases, patient family advisory committee involvement. You want to have that frontline nurse tech, PCA, transporter, EVS worker. There's so many variables to account for when making clinical workflow decisions and layering over technology to gain efficiency. Sure, every application you can implement in your environment can produce outcomes. Hands down, that's why it's a product being sold. How you choose to implement it and what level of input you get to build out the structure and then have accountability to it over time, that is the difference. And I think that's been my approach. It's how I've been raised. Everyone should be treated as an equal and well. And then from a professional standpoint, it's everyone who has stakeholder input should be at the table to provide their input, at least to a certain point. And then when business decisions need to be made, obviously that's a little bit different. But as it pertains to workflows, solutions for site, I really feel strongly a collective, committee needs to be set up and needs to be sustained, and there needs to be governance. And without it, you're just throwing ideas and paying a lot of money, and over time it'll fizzle out.
So one of the things you're really talking about is change management. And there's a science to change management for sure, and there are many change management playbooks, but there's also an art to it. So I look at you as somebody who is a practitioner in the science of it, but also in the art of it. And from the standpoint of understanding who to bring, and also creating an environment where people feel included. Lots of times things move really fast, or somebody is driving something for maybe not necessarily the best possible reasons for the good of the organization. So finding a way to kind of bring all that together ends up being really important.
Well, that I will say is where I do feel I have a little bit of a unique edge starting my career as a therapist. I really, really dove into the human psyche, human behavior, industrial organizational psychology, just understanding how, it's important to pay attention and be quiet as a leader and observe, do less talking. You'll get to see who's really behind you, who's championing with you. You'll get to realize, who is going to be a part of the solution. And more importantly, what are the relationships in the room? What do I need to do to facilitate those better relationships across different disciplines? Because in the nonverbals, am I seeing like, oh, they're not even talking at all. They're not a part of this larger project. So I need to hone in on that. And I think that is the difference maker. And a leader kind of creating the governance around the structure of whatever solution they're pursuing for site, that I see that as their bigger job. It's picking up on the what's not said and picking up on, when we commit financially, we're going to need everybody playing on the same team together. So everybody has to really, really work together during the planning phase.
And your vendor partner is part of that.
100%.
Part of that team. And also they need to have an awareness of the complexity of the dynamic, right? I think that the hope is you're going to get the PO, but there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be done before you can get the PO, if you're going to get the PO.
So true. And for any salesperson that's worked in healthcare, because I've sat on the other end of the table, it's a very arduous process. There is nothing quick there.
Well, especially if the system has any level of complexity and it's not a commodity.
Yeah.
So, talking about change management, I think we were mostly exploring that just now from a people perspective, but systems have a whole change management life cycle unto themselves. So one of the elements of the work that we did together was that you had a certain set of cards that you had in your hand that you had to work your way through. The tendency on the manufacturer or the service provider side is they want you to buy new stuff, all new stuff, get rid of the old stuff. So you have been in the middle of strategizing about integrating new technology, yet leveraging existing technology to maximize value and minimize disruption. Let's talk a little bit about why that's important and some things that you may have done in order to make that work.
Okay. Well, I think one thing that goes into it during the planning stage, that's called, is clear workflows, right? It's critical. So the development of, again, who is a critical stakeholder in the workflow, and identifying, what allows optimal peak performance. If we're looking at a technology, and in our case, it was leveraging allied wireless communication through nurse call and middleware, and how do we get the best possible notifications to the right end users at the right time to ensure the right responsiveness, and how does that translate to outcomes from a KPI perspective? And it was very, very involved, but you follow that map from beginning to end, and you identify, all right, at every exchange, who it's truly a flow map. So from the beginning to the end, who is a critical early onset stakeholder, who's the middle of the sandwich, and then towards the tail end, how do we bring it home? And then if we miss it, how do we loop it back to the beginning to have redundancy so we never fall short? Or that's the ultimate goal. You never want to fall short in patient care. So I think that is critical. And it's not easy, the clear workflow mapping. It's not easy to ensure you've accounted for every stakeholder. And when you're designing the workflow, that it actually complements their work, because you're dealing with so many different disciplines, right? You're dealing with nursing, you're dealing with the lab, you're dealing with pharmacy in some cases. Not all of their workflows are just going to seamlessly work into the product or work into the solution. So that is critical. Beyond that, after I just said a whole lot of words, plain language communication, right? Just simplifying it for the end users. It's going to take a lot of work on the front end to develop the workflows with the right people. And then how do you develop education and content that is so simplistic? There is a culture shift, because that's another piece of this, right? It depending on what you're bringing into the institution, it can be very, very impactful, and you need that adoption. And the only way you get that is through good leadership, good engagement, stakeholder input, and then good planning with really, really simple education. Hopefully that answered the question.
Well, it did, and I'll take us a little further. So, back to the whole legacy technology, we did multiple things where we created a progressive map to get to a future state that recognized that in some cases you were able to carry out certain kinds of things the old-fashioned way, yet still get the kind of outcomes you were looking for, because you had an understanding of where you were and where you wanted to go, and you were able to make some decisions about how to get there.
That also raises a really good point back to the earlier part of the conversation. It's like long-term vendor relationship. Like you could have very easily capitalized on some of those easier workflows that I'm sure you could have charged several $1,000s for to the organization. But I think that's important, and I'm sorry to go and dovetail here, but the honest reality of, hey, you don't have to do all of this, right? Let's pause. What do you really need, and what do you really have? That also plays into the longevity of a site and vendor relationship.
So we would be remiss if we didn't get a little bit more specific about some of the adoptions that maybe with me, but maybe with others that you worked on where patient and staff outcomes were improved?
Yeah. So there's been several. I'll start with ours, right? So through yourself and the team at T2 CareSite, we developed some very, very interesting clinical alarm fatigue reduction workflows. What started with, mass audible notifications overhead to alert staff of codes, right? Ensuring everyone hears it clearly, audibly, and pushes to Vocera, so everyone at the end user point always hears. We then dovetailed and just did so much more. And the patient in room experience, from call bell to nurse, and then to nurse buddy, and then to PCA. And what we built was workflows and responsiveness that ensured, I'm a patient in the bed, and every 30 seconds, my call is rolling over to another team member and then to another team member. And rest assured, I think, we had greater than 92% response rate. But what was so interesting, and this was the most fun, this is the clinical alarm reduction piece, we started to look deeper and peel the layers of the onion back on, all right, we built cool workflows, we built communication tools, and it's going to the right people. How much of it is noise, and how much can be reduced from in-room nurse call to in the hall to end user Vocera? And so what we found is, depending on, and a good example would be a cord out alarm. So cord out alarm is when a physical hospital bed is being moved and the cord is pulled out of nurse call. What we identified is, I believe the number was greater than 95%, possibly 96% were canceled in less than 30 seconds. We knew our staff aren't responding within 30 seconds to every single call. So for that to be happening, what we translated it to is, when a transporter or when an EVS team member is in the room and they're cleaning, as soon as they disconnect, they quickly silence it. And many of these, actually, I think the vast majority were under 10 seconds. And we quickly realized, all right, our staff are just canceling out. Why do our staff have to hear that? Why do our patients have to hear that? So we reduced from anywhere from 18% in certain cases to greater than 50%, depending on the type of alarm. So presenting tremendous noise reduction overall. And the staff, we did our own internal surveys. This actually became more of a staff engagement and satisfaction outcome, as opposed to just purely patient, which was a really cool byproduct, actually. We went into this with the mindset it's for the patient, and it was, but we wanted to make it better for the staff, and really including the stakeholders and having them and their input on how they wanted to reduce the alarms. And we had a serious governance model around this, where there was every single stakeholder around the room. Kenny, I don't know if you remember, but it was quite the representation, which was great, because that's what you want. And we did a great job of reducing alert and alarm fatigue causing notifications that were unnecessary.
And what happened in the process is that there was a common language that was understood in the organization about how all these things go together, and the ability to focus everybody through that common language is ultimately attributed to you. And you're not an IT guy, and you were in a quasi operations role, but you were kind of in between all that, so that you were not seen as pushing something down people's throats, and you were able to get everybody kind of swimming in the same direction.
Yeah, no, and what I also found, and this is critical, I guess, from the sales side as well, for any vendor stepping in the door of a healthcare executive, you get the operationals leader, that's great. You need to make sure you get their partner in nursing leadership, because there is a dynamic duo in any healthcare setting. There's your vice president of operations, executive director, chief operating officer, whatever it is of operations. But that chief nurse or that senior nurse director, such a critical person to connect with as you develop longevity in the relationship over time. Because at the end of the day, it's healthcare.
Yeah, and hence the notion of coalition. Right?
Exactly.
Right? So let's ask a few more questions regarding kind of technology adoption. And there's inherently complexity to especially a system sale, right? So systems at the system level, but also systems that involve other systems. So what advice would you give to vendors who are navigating the complexity of hospital technology procurement and implementation? We covered some of those, but let's get a good kind of summary of all of that.
Okay, and I guess the shortest summary I can give is as the sales entity coming in, we need to align on value, not features. And what I mean by that, don't tout every bell and whistle of the solution. Keep speaking. This sounds selfish, but keep speaking my language. What are my goals? What are my needs organizationally? And how is this solution going to be better or higher prioritized than one of the other many needs of the organization to ensure the best outcome for patient care? So that's the complexity, right? As a solution sales vendor, it's an expensive product, right? So we're not talking pennies. It's an investment in any organization, but most organizations are faced with some serious capital needs year over year. It just doesn't matter. You could have the most affluent area, you could have very underserved area. There are capital needs in any organization. I don't care where you say. How does one get this product to display greater value and more importance than that C-arm in some cases, right? To give an example, very different products, and they shouldn't be in the same conversation, but in some organizations they will. So how do you ensure that value is understood so that when it gets through procurement and it gets through implementation, it's not just you as vendor pushing that boulder up the mountain. You really want the partnership with the site leadership that's, let's say, pushing it up the corporate mountain along with you. You don't want to be just the entity bothering the heads of procurement, because all they're dealing with is the asks of every single. If it's a local site, it's every single department. If it's a network, it's every single site and every single department that falls under them. That's a lot of asks. That's a lot of priorities. So how do you underline, highlight, and ensure the value of your solution is greater and should be greater prioritized than our other competing needs? That's saying a lot, and it's not easy to actually do because you're never going to know the full complement of needs of the organization, but driving that value and really ensuring that the site leads understand it and can speak that language with you.
Right. So when somebody like yourself or people in your kinds of roles who are providing leadership around a technology solution, they're going to inherently have to deal with the people who are going to have to make the buy.
Exactly.
The whole procurement engine of an organization, but also inevitably IT, if it's a technology buy. So why don't we talk a little bit about some of the sausage there?
Yeah.
We over time had to go climb some very large mountains on both those angles. Do you have any tips for a vendor around that?
Yeah, that's just as complex as procurement, to be honest with you. It is a hurdle that you have to get through. You can't get to procurement until you get through an IT security review in many cases. So how do we navigate it? One, it's no different, right? You really have to highlight the value of your solution once again. And then moreover, if you're dealing with a larger network, does your solution have scalability? How safe and secure is it to work with? If it's a pure startup, it's got to really be a wow factor for it to be, or it's got to be like a joint venture opportunity with the site. It really needs to be tested, tried and true, have some data to support, what it's doing. But again, what is the need of the organization, be it site-based? What is the need of the network or health system at large? And those can vary by many degrees. What's needed at site level versus what's needed at a network level can be very, very different. So again, it goes back to the relationship building. You want to have more than just the operations leader as said colleague. And as a vendor, you're still a colleague, or that's how it should be anyway. And it's really critical to develop the rapport and relationship with a head of IT or a head of IT security if it is a different branch of government, if you will. Because really what it boils down to is once you understand what their parameters are and what their, let's say from a vendor perspective, rate limiting factors are, but once you can understand how to work around them and you know what they're asking for and know what to produce and can, in some cases, maybe shift your product in subtle ways, not ways that would put you out of business, but in ways that would meet some, IT security requirements. Once you have the ability and agility to do that, and you understand what the ask is, and again, you could support, here's the value of my product, it is much easier. It's not easy, but it is easier.
Well, I would say that we reached a point in our evolution where it became pretty clear to us that we needed to be proactive about it. So we needed to anticipate the questions we would be asked and be able to answer them. And we also learned along the way that sometimes you can't meet a particular element of how a questionnaire is written. And as long as you can show that you're headed in that direction and the organization understands the impact and the value of what they're buying, accommodations will be made.
Yeah. And another thing to be said, like once foot is in the door and you've become a trusted partner in a network, and you keep those relationships not only with the person that you sold the product to, but those important IT security folks and CTOs and CIOs, like maintain those relationships, because that too that next service or that next opportunity that you're trying to expand upon the solution that you got in the door in the first place, these are things that will allow for those long-lasting relationships, fostering trust.
Well, reputation matters. Right?
Absolutely.
So, I came to Northern Westchester because we had done a bunch of good work at Sister Hospital Phelps. So I was introduced, as opposed to me kind of sticking my foot in trying to hold the door open with my foot while it was being closed on me. So let's have a little fun. Let's do a kind of a lightning round to close our conversation today. So,
sounds good.
One piece of advice to hospitals about choosing technology partners, what would that be?
Choose partners who listen more than they pitch ideas.
All right, listening. Number 2, what's the biggest mistake hospitals make when evaluating vendors, and how can they avoid that?
Falling in love with demos. I think many times leaders go off to great conferences, they learn a lot, and they just fall in love with a quick demo, never realizing, the complexity behind it.
Next one. How can hospitals and vendors work together to ensure technology adoption leads to real improvements for patients and staff?
That to me is easy. It's measure what matters and include the right people when making those decisions.
What's one thing vendors often overlook that would make a huge difference in the building of lasting relationships?
One that I think goes a long way, and it really doesn't happen often. It's the shadowing of clinic. It's a very, I'm sorry because I know this is supposed to be a lightning round, but it's a very fraternal environment, right? So I think the importance of a vendor or an operation leader having the willingness to walk in my shoes of a nurse or walk in my shoes of a doctor, observation and spending that time to understand their workflows and then just seeing their pain points. It's rare, but I think if more people were willing to do it or showed the willingness to do it, you'd be surprised at the relationship building aspect and the trust factor.
Well, I don't know if you remember, but there was a time where I came on site and we recorded all of the audio that was going on in the various rooms on a particular unit.
That's when we were having interference, yes.
And I can remember being amongst some non-healthcare people, and I literally I created a PowerPoint slide where I started layering on all the different audible tones that were going on in rooms, whether it be chair mats and overhead paging and physiological monitoring and just and the people in the room said to me, that's not real. It's
No. It's very real.
very real.
Shocking, and that's important too. Just the graphic, the data and the graphic that grabbed people.
Yes, no question. All right, last one. How do you recommend hospitals hold vendors accountable for outcomes, not just deliverables?
Well, I think really the vendors that have those monthly check-in meetings, right? It really can't just be sign the contract, get the solution in the house, and then after the deployment, the first month and a half they're there. There needs to be a regular cadence and governance. What I mean by governance, earlier when we were discussing workflow, it's not just at the planning and go live stage. There's also how do you sustain productivity? How do you now, okay, you've raised the bar, now how do you fine tune the needle? How do you continue to raise the bar leveraging this new technology, leveraging these newer workflows? That requires the vendor at the table. So there needs to be, when you're having these governance meetings, a representation of your vendor partner. And I emphasize the word partner because you need them at the table. One, when you want to create new ideas, and in some cases they're not even going to be a cost to your organization. It's good to have them at the table. In others, you may need them to improve a workflow, and that may require some intense, quick collaboration. I can think of a few scenarios where it really did require some steadfast, agile movement on your guys' end. So it stands out.
Yeah, and as you were talking, the word collaboration stood out to me. So if you didn't say it, I was going to say it too. We've done a yeoman work, kind of exploring all the things that we said we were going to talk about today. Is there anything I didn't talk to you about you want to mention?
No, I appreciate the conversation. This is stuff that I certainly enjoy talking about, and it's really good to put it out there. I think a lot of people are scared to leverage new technology, new workflows, and just finding that right person to help champion it could make the world of difference for patient care and staff engagement.
Well, and as I've looked at your journey, I would say that when you started, you didn't have the experience you have today. So you're seasoned, right? So that you have a sense of what things could come and bite you in the what.
For sure.
And you pay attention to those so that you don't get to that point when you can't.
Do my best, absolutely. But no, this has been great.
All right, thank you very much, George. I love opportunity to talk to you. All right, bye. Thanks so much for joining us today on CarePoints. I encourage you to hit the like button and subscribe so that you can get notified when we release our next episodes. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting service, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, whatever your favorite platform is. And make sure to visit us on the web at www.lonestarcom.com/podcast. That's www.lonestarcom.com/podcast. You'll find all of our old episodes there. Thanks so much for listening, and looking forward to having you back soon.